Time for another board game review, and this time we have the game Marvel HeroClix Spider-Man Beyond Amazing Miniatures game. This was sent to me by WizKids. Play out 7 exciting campaign scenarios for 2 players where the results matter from session to session, or sit down for a head-to-head single match of raw power. Each of the 10 detailed, ready-to-play figures comes with 2 different ways to play for both first-time miniatures players and HeroClix veterans. So this is, part of HeroClix, which has been around forever. And it's like a standalone game where you can just play 2-player. Let me show you how to play. So HeroClix is one of your classic, guys on the map running around beating each other up. This particular set comes with scenarios. So something like scenario A here, Spider-Man team versus Sinister Six. You get 2 actions, and then you use a specific map. So let's just kind of go through basic concepts. So if you look at one of these guys, you can see that there's a sort of dial here, and as they take damage, this will turn 2 different number values. We'll go over what those are later, but if you get clicked all the way to KO, that character is defeated. So that's how that works. And then you can see each character has a card. It tells you what the different levels of the disc are, as well as their abilities. There is a whole pamphlet of all these keywords that you can look up for each character. So, depending on where the dial is, you can see that there are colors in the numbers. So some abilities are only unlocked at certain stages of the disc. So how a turn works in HeroClix is, besides there's stuff that's like, at the beginning of a turn, at the end of a turn, stuff happens. Barring those aside, you do an action phase. You may take a number of actions up to your action total, and any number of different free actions. For most games, the action total is 3, but in this scenario, it is 2. So you give them action tokens when they have done an action. So one of these, you'll put it on their card to mark that they used an action. When a character gains a second action token, they can no longer perform any actions except free actions until their action tokens are cleared. And the only way to clear tokens is if any of your characters did not receive an action token that turn, then you clear the tokens off the characters at the end of the turn. Some basic actions, let's go over those. There's movement. You look at your speed value. So if you look at the card here, that tells you how many spaces you can move for the top number. So somebody like Mysterio, he can move 7 spaces. You can move diagonally. 2 characters cannot occupy the same square. If you are ever adjacent to an enemy, like let's say Mysterio was here and Spider-Woman was here, if you want to break away from them, you have to roll a die. So if I wanted to go, let's say, back, roll a die, it's 1 to 3, then it's a fail, they stay there. However, you still get an action token for trying. 4 to 6, you would break away. And for the remainder of the action, you no longer have to break away from other enemies. You can move freely. Then, another type of action you can do is close attack. If you are, adjacent to a character, you can do one of those. We'll go over those later. There are also range attacks, as long as you're within line of fire and the range. So if we look at the disc, so that little number above or the lightning or next to the lightning bolt, that is the range. And as long as they are within line of fire, then you can target them and do an attack. Line of fire is blocked if it intersects blocking terrain. What you do is you draw a line from the center of the square to the character, and if that line intersects blocking terrain, or if they're on different levels of elevation, except if the character is at higher elevation, is on the rim, there's a whole thing. So yeah, usually just as long as something's blocking it, you can do a range attack. So let's go over how combat works. So depending on the character, some characters can attack more than one target. Like Mysterio there are 2 lightning bolts next to that number, so he can target 2 characters at once with an attack. But in general, let's just go over how an attack works. So right now, Mysterio's attack value is 10, and you roll 2d6. So I rolled 11. and I add that to my attack value. So my attack value is 21. If I'm attacking Spider-Woman, we look at her defense. Right now it is 17. So that is a hit. If it was lower, then that was a miss. If you roll 2 6s, that's a critical hit, which deals 1 extra damage to each character hit. If you roll doubles that aren't Snake Eyes, you actually do knockback, where you knock the character back, which I'll show later. If you roll Snake Eyes, double ones, it misses, and you take 1 unavoidable damage. So, in this case, it was a successful hit. I look at the damage value. In this case, right now, it is 3. So that would be 3 damage to Spider-Woman. So then you take their disc, and you go 1, 2, 3. So she took a bunch of damage. If knockback occurred, the attacking player will place that character up to 3 squares away. And there's a whole bunch of rules, like if they would be knocked into another character, they stop moving, or a wall, they take a damage. If they knock into a square of lower elevation, they stop and then they take a damage. So there's all these different little rules for that. Other than that, there are different actions on the characters. So those also count as actions. And that's pretty much the beef of the game. Now, there are a lot of rules about terrain. So as you can see on the board, there are different colored lines. So red is elevated. And if you want to, you must end your movement when crossing a red elevated terrain boundary, unless you're moving from one square with a transition indicator into the square connected by that. Line of fire cannot be drawn from a low elevation to a high elevation, but high to low can be drawn. There's also squares along the boundary of elevated terrain. That's called the rim, so they can target each other. So that's elevated terrain. Green lines, that's hindering. So what that means is if you try to do line of fire through them, the target gets +1 defense because it's harder to shoot through them. There's also blocked terrain. It just means you can't move through them or shoot through them. There's also destructible terrain. So an object like this, you know, they can be placed on the map in different scenarios. So this number here, you can also like pick up terrain and throw them as a ranged terrain action. So it's, I don't know if I need to go through all of this, but you can pick up objects, throw them at each other, you can destroy them. They turn into debris when they're destroyed. There's a whole bunch of stuff. The regular scenarios are here, but you can also build your own team and play like classic, or I think it's classic, I don't play HeroClix. But you know, you can make a team using a certain number of points and you know, fight that way. And then let me just show you like an example of what somebody's abilities might look like. So Mysterio, for example, he's got Sinister Syndicate. When this character makes an attack, you may replace its attack value with the printed attack value of an adjacent friendly character that can use this team ability. So Sinister Syndicate characters boost each other. And then you got these and you got to go through and find them. So like Mind Control is minimum range 4. Make a close range attack. Instead of normal damage, each hit character halves speed and becomes friendly to your force. And one at a time may either move and or attack, then they revert back. Smoke Cloud, that is minimum range. Generate up to 6 smoke terrain markers, one at a time in distinct squares within range. Other than the first, each marker must be adjacent to at least one another, and at least one must be within line of fire. Opposing characters occupying one or more of these markers modify attack -1. So, you know, it just blocks attack. Mastermind, when the character would be hit by an opponent's attack that deals damage. Why is this not focusing? You may choose I'm gonna just put this down. You may choose an adjacent friendly character that wouldn't be hit by this attack and that has less points or shares a keyword. That friendly character instead becomes a hit target of the attack, even if it's already a target. So yeah, it's like you can, you know, deflect the blow. So shape change. When this character would be targeted by an attack, you may roll a d6. 5 to 6, this character cannot be targeted by the attacker this turn. The attacker may choose a different target instead. So he's all about tricky, you know, deflecting attacks, manipulating things. Very Mysterio. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, you move around, try to hit each other, use your abilities. Here are some of the other minis. Got Bullseye and Venom and Miles Morales, Gwen Stacy, or Spider-Gwen, and Shocker! Get back here, Shocker! Shocker! So I think I'm finding more and more that this sort of game, this your classic, okay, you get a bunch of guys, you move them around, and you roll dice to hit each other, is just not the type of game that I like or click with. Haha, HeroClix. So I think I'm just not the target audience for this. But let's break this game down. One thing I do like is the idea of the combat dial, where as you take damage, you unlock different powers and your stats change. I think that's actually pretty neat. I thought it'd be more annoying to have to check, and it is a little annoying to check the little numbers every time, and the numbers are very small. But after a couple times, I was like, okay, this isn't that bad. I thought it was going to be way more annoying. This game does feature something I don't love, and that is a giant list of keywords that you have to look up for each character. And listen, this is not necessarily a deal breaker for me all the time. My favorite game of all time is Marvel Legendary, and if you buy the expansions, there are a ton of keywords to look up. But for that game, I think the game is rewarding enough and intuitive enough where it's worth it. Plus, the keywords often apply to multiple cards. In this game, a lot of the characters individually have like 3 to 4 keywords, and they're usually like special to that character. Not always, you know, they share some keywords. But you have to look them up and memorize them, and they're kind of complicated, and it's kind of a pain. It does help that you don't often have, you know, because of the dial system, you only usually have a couple of those keywords you have to worry about at a time. But it's still kind of a drag. I will say that this version of the game feels very limiting. Because you only have, what, 2 to 3 guys. It's not super exciting. And then if you lose a guy, it feels really punishing because you just lose out on actions. This whole, like, if you don't use the character, that'll clear out the action tokens, and then you can use them again. It feels sluggish to me. I'm sure it's for balancing reasons, especially if you play, like, the full team thing. But it felt irritating. Like, especially in this package of this, you know, very small fights. Especially if you're down one guy, it just feels like you have less and less you can do. It doesn't feel like a good, satisfying game flow to me. And then overall, the game is just too fiddly. The terrain rules, it's just, there's 4 types of terrain, and all these things you gotta keep track of, and then at the end of the day, you're really just roll the dice to see if you hit. So it's like, after all that, oh, and then I did that, and then we gotta check for this, and do this, and what's this ability do? And then you just roll a dice, see if you hit. To me, personally, it's just not fun enough to justify all of that fiddliness and upkeep. With that said, the painted miniatures themselves are awesome. I totally get the appeal of collecting these guys. As a toy, I think they look great. And I guess at the end of the day, that is the main draw, right? So I think, if I think of this as like a really, cool set of collectible little Marvel guys, and I mean, they're painted, they look great, they're just really good quality, and then there's a decent, game attached to it that you can play, then that's not so bad. But if I'm looking at this purely as a board game, it's really not something I enjoy. I think if you're the type of person who likes this kind of thing, you like, memorizing all these keywords and, having all these little, I'll make sure I account for terrain and blah, 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 then you'll like it. Especially if you like Marvel, then I think you'll like it. But if you're like me, and that just sounds like kind of a pain, then it's not really worth it to me.